Today, let's work out your calisthenics level. So what I've done is I've put on the board beginner, intermediate, advanced, and I've gone through the most common calisthenics skills. Now, these are the ones that I train towards, the ones that I coach. Obviously, there's different disciplines, different areas within calisthenics. So if you're more someone that swings around on the bars and competes in calisthenics, you're going to have a different list on there. But you could go through the same process for yourself. And what we're going to do today is we're going to populate this with different exercises, different progressions towards the end goals, and we'll see where you fit on these columns. And obviously this is very subjective in terms of what we think is beginner, intermediate and advanced, and also the specifics of each level, but we'll get into that as we go. So let's pick planche to start with, a nice and simple one in terms of a more of a linear pathway from beginner to advanced. Now advanced would be seen as a full planche position, so straight body and holding for say 10 seconds plus. You could even go beyond that and do something like a full planche press. So press from the straight body position all the way up to handstand. Intermediate level is probably going to be around a straddle planche, maybe a half lay in there, arguably easier or harder than a straddle planche. Then we could go back to advanced tuck, tuck planche, band, toe assist, tuck planche, toes on the floor, even like a crow or a frog position. There's obviously another line of progression within each section. So beginner has a very easy beginner, a very hard beginner level, before we then merge into intermediate and we do the same thing, and the same as we go into advanced. So this is a progression line that constantly changes. And we could argue about whether if you hold a tuck planche for 30 seconds, is that intermediate or is that still advanced beginner? It can get a bit tricky, but the main thing is knowing your progression line and making sure we don't have any big gaps between these. Next, let's look at handstand. So we have one arm handstand as being the advanced. Beyond that would be something like a one arm handstand press. Probably the borderline between intermediate and advanced would be one arm handstand, but with fingertip supports. Then we have more the advanced positions, something like a 7 deep tuck, a straddle, a freestanding handstand. So interestingly, with the freestanding handstand, we'd have to put on like a duration hold that takes us from beginner to an intermediate level. So I'd say an intermediate level is hitting the 60-second freestanding handstand, and maybe the end of the beginner is around the 20 to 30 second mark. But again, it's different, shows the control. Like someone who's holding for 20 to 30 seconds might not be able to kick up 10 out of 10 times. So where does that put them on that scope of beginner to intermediate? It's really tricky, especially if you're going all the way to a one arm handstand press. So we might go to a toe pull, heel pull, and chest to wall hold. So already from this, you'll be starting to see where you fit on these ones. Interestingly, you might be advanced on the handstand balance, but you might be beginner level on the planche. So what will be interesting at the end is when we populate all of this is to circle where we are on all of them and see where we fit in the beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I'll do that for myself at the end. Next, let's look at muscle up. Now muscle up's an interesting one because you can keep pulling that further and further into the advanced category by going a little bit away from the muscle up, but some super impressive pulling from below the rings or bar to above. So something like an elevator, which is like an upside down muscle up, a muted hip. So basically with that one, you're not closing at the hip when you do the muscle up. It's really challenging. We have things like back rolls and forward rolls. So back roll would be harder than a forward roll, and we can go progressions on them in terms of whether we keep the body open or close the body. Now I'm just going to put strict muscle up in. I'm not going to cover the dynamic muscle ups. It's going to be somewhere in the intermediate level, and obviously that depends on your goals and why you're doing the muscle up, but I'll put a strict muscle up in as the intermediate level, and that could be bar and or rings. Before that, we would have maybe a yo-yo, so going a partial range down and back up again. Then we have the down only, which is the negative. We have false grip, chin up. We have the chin up itself, and then the other part of the muscle up, we have the dip. And before that, we have row and push up. Next, let's look at the handstand push up. So the hardest variation would probably be a dead press. So laying down fully on the floor, no momentum, and lifting slowly up with a straight body all the way to handstand. And we have 90-degree handstand push up, deficit handstand push up, coming down to collarbone or chest to hit the box, or step or P-bars, whatever you're doing it on. We have freestanding handstand push up. We have wall assist. We have partial range, pike push-up, and standard push-up. You could argue dips in there as well. And even pike push-up, there's a lot of progressions between them, so there's floor to elevated. Now, when it comes to handstand press, I'd probably say the stool to press is the hardest. And we have the pike press and the L-sit versions. I actually probably argue whether the stool to press or the L-sit press to handstand is easier or harder. I can definitely do the stool to press easier than the L-sit version. So they probably need to be flipped around, but that definitely does depend on the individual. Then you have straddle press, tuck press. Again, not sure which one is easier, depends on the individual. Partial range, depends how partial, but I'll put that in next. Eccentrics, freestanding. eccentric wall. And then beginner level is going to be maybe say a jump, passing through the pathway of the press handstand, the static holds of straddle and tuck, and then the easier levels are going to be like a floor press. And then check this out, I've filled in the lever one, and look, it's identical to the planche one because the planche is the reverse of the lever. However, one thing to bear in mind is the front lever is much easier for most people than a planche is. So if you had two people that were identical and everything else, but one of them could do a full planche and one of them can do a front lever, the person that could do the full planche, in my eyes, would be more advanced in terms of calisthenics than the person that can do the front lever. But they do have exactly the same progressions as you go along. Now, flexibility is quite tricky to put into beginner, intermediate, advanced, but let's try. Let's say head to toe. So that's your forward fold flexibility. The hardest variation would be both legs at the same time. Full splits, and I would say that would be middle splits. Full front splits would be slightly easier. Straight-legged bridge, wheel pose, and we have floor bridge. So floor bridge will be when your shoulders are on top of your hands. The straight-legged one is the same, but much harder. Maybe palms to floor forward fold, overhead squat, fingers to floor forward fold, resting squat, 90-degree good morning, chest to floor straddle pancake, elbows to floor. And really you could split all those apart because some people will have like a good pancake position but terrible splits, or you might be like me and have terrible bridge but have head to toe. Okay, so let's now go through and rate myself. So one arm handstand I can do. Now I can only do it really well on the right side. Left side is 10 seconds on a good day. I can do all those presses. I can do a dead press, but it's got bent legs. So I could say that should go backwards a little bit. I don't have a 10-second full planche. I've got like a 2-second one before. So let's say I'm around here now. I can hold a front lever, but only for a few seconds with a false grip. So let's say the same. I'm probably around there. I can do a 360 pull, so that pulls me that way a little bit, but it's not perfect in terms of having a full front lever. Muscle up, I can't do an elevator. I've got a back roll like once. It really plays up my wrist, so I don't train them too much. I can easily do a forward roll. So let's go there. In terms of flexibility, I'm quite deep into the forward fold. I can get head to toe, but my bridge is terrible. My front splits aren't flat. My full splits aren't currently flat. So I'll probably put myself somewhere in there. So if we look at the main bands, you're going to say that I personally are around there, me. So if we're talking specifics, you'd say I was advanced on these movements, intermediate to advanced on these. So let me know your thoughts on this one. Where do you sit on these? What would you rate yourselves? Do you think I've missed anything out? Am I categorized them? Am I using the wrong format to scale this? And remember, this also doubles up as a progression line for these skills. So if you're somewhere here, you know what to work on next. If you feel stuck with that, I have all the progression lines and programs on my app. Links are down in the description. Thumbs up and subscribe would be appreciated. I'll speak to you in the next one.